What would you do if you were accused of something you didn't do? Worse, what if someone planted evidence against you in front of a courtroom full of people? Alicia Carter, a highly respected financial analyst, sat at the defendant's table, her heart pounding in her chest as the entire courtroom stared at her. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, facing accusations that seemed as outlandish as they were painful. Just a week ago, Alicia had been celebrated as a whistleblower, hailed for exposing a massive corporate fraud at one of the world's largest billion-dollar firms. She had done the right thing, uncovering a web of deceit that had been covered up for years. The media had praised her for her courage, and many had looked up to her as a symbol of integrity. But now, she was the one on trial, accused of accepting a bribe to help cover up the very fraud she had exposed. Alicia couldn't believe the turn her life had taken. She had fought so hard to do the right thing, to uphold justice. And now, it seemed like she was being dragged into a nightmare she could not escape. In front of her, a police officer stepped forward, holding a thick stack of $100 bills in his gloved hands. He slid the pile of money toward her on the table with a deliberate motion, as if it were some irrefutable proof of her guilt. The crisp bills fluttered slightly as they made their way to Alicia's side of the table. Her eyes locked onto them, her stomach turning. She had worked her entire career to build her reputation, to earn the trust of her colleagues and clients. Now, this, a setup so meticulously crafted, so carefully placed in front of her. It felt like a trap, and she couldn't figure out who was behind it, or why they would go to such lengths to ruin her life. The prosecutor, standing just a few feet away, watched her with a smirk that spoke volumes of his confidence. His voice was smooth, dripping with disdain as he addressed the court. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone patronizing, "everyone has a price. What's yours?" Alicia's heart raced as she stared at the money, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Her mind screamed for answers. Who was doing this to her? Who had planted this money and why? She had been a whistleblower, someone who had risked everything to expose the truth. Now, she was being framed for a crime she hadn't committed. She was no criminal. She had spent years working her way up in the financial world, committed to uncovering the truth and ensuring justice was served. Yet here she was, accused of the very thing she had worked against for so long. The thought of being convicted for bribery, a crime she had never been involved in, twisted something deep within her. It was surreal, like being trapped in someone else's nightmare. Alicia took a deep breath, trying to push the panic down. She could not let herself break down in front of all these people. If she did, it would only make it easier for them to frame her. She needed to think, to stay calm and figure out who was behind this. There were powerful forces at play here, forces that were trying to bring her down. But why? Her mind raced as the prosecutor continued with his accusations, painting her as a corrupt individual, as someone willing to sell out everything she stood for. Alicia knew that the more she protested, the more it would seem like guilt. She couldn't let her emotions get the best of her. But the truth was, the situation was a nightmare. As she sat there, staring at the money that had been planted to frame her, Alicia knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a trial. It was a fight for her very freedom. The question now wasn't about whether she was innocent, but who wanted to see her fall and why. Would you trust the justice system if you knew it was stacked against you? Let us know in the comments. Just a few weeks earlier, Alicia Carter had been on top of the world. She was respected and admired for her dedication and sharp instincts as a financial analyst at Sterling and Moore Financial Group. For years, she had worked diligently, uncovering shady deals and unethical practices within the company. It was when she stumbled upon a series of suspicious transactions, millions of dollars being laundered through various accounts, that everything changed. Alicia knew that what she had found couldn't be ignored. She took the brave step of blowing the whistle, submitting all the files she had uncovered to federal investigators. The weight of the evidence she presented would expose the company's illegal activities and put those responsible in jeopardy. At first, Alicia felt relief. She had done the right thing. She had taken a stand against corruption, no longer willing to turn a blind eye to the rot within her workplace. She expected praise, maybe even recognition for her courage. She imagined a future where she could continue her work, knowing she had made a difference. But instead of being celebrated, Alicia's life was turned upside down. Within days, everything changed. Instead of receiving accolades, Alicia found herself the target of an investigation. Her accounts were frozen without explanation. She tried to access her email only to discover that many of her messages had been mysteriously deleted. It was as if someone was systematically erasing her existence from the company's records, trying to make it as though she had never worked there at all. But the most shocking blow came from the last person she expected, her own boss, the CEO of Sterling and Moore, who publicly accused her of accepting a bribe to keep quiet about the fraudulent activities. His voice was cold and cutting, casting doubt on her integrity in front of everyone. Alicia couldn't understand it. She had risked everything to expose the truth, and now she was being painted as a criminal. The very people she had helped uncover were now the ones trying to destroy her reputation. "I can't believe it," Alicia had said to her attorney, shaking her head in disbelief. "They're trying to make me look guilty for exposing them." The words felt like a punch to the gut, a betrayal so deep that it left her breathless. She had believed in the justice system, in the power of doing the right thing, but now it seemed like she was the one being punished for her integrity. Standing in the courtroom, watching that pile of money sit in front of her, money that she had been accused of accepting, it all became painfully clear. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to bury the truth. The bribe that was now being used to accuse her wasn't just a coincidence. It was part of a well-orchestrated plan to frame her, to make it look like she had been part of the corruption she had worked so hard to expose. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been set up, betrayed by the very people she had trusted. This wasn't just a case of wrongful accusations. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy her life and silence her. She had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, she had made powerful enemies, people willing to go to great lengths to protect their secrets. Alicia's hands trembled as she stared at the money on the table in front of her, knowing full well that it was a planted piece of evidence designed to implicate her in a crime she hadn't committed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pacing slowly in front of the jury, his voice dripping with disdain, "we are looking at a woman who took a 6-figure bribe to betray the very company that trusted her." Gasps filled the room. The sharp intake of breath echoed from every corner as Alicia's heart dropped into her stomach. The words hit her like a punch, each one calculated to turn the jury against her. She had already seen how easily the system could twist the truth, how quickly the powerful could manipulate the narrative. This wasn't justice. It was a trial based on lies. The jury shifted uncomfortably, some looking at Alicia with judgment, others exchanging glances that betrayed their uncertainty. Alicia's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to remain composed. She could feel the weight of the room's scrutiny, the pressure mounting with every passing second. But then came the final blow. "Miss Carter!" The prosecutor sneered, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Would you care to explain why your fingerprints are all over this money?" A stunned silence filled the air. Alicia froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to spin around her as her eyes locked onto the pile of money in front of her. It wasn't just a random stack. It was the same money the officer had placed on the table earlier, the money that had been used to frame her. But now it was marked. It had her fingerprints on it. How? Alicia hadn't touched the money. She hadn't even come close to it. She felt the panic surge through her chest, but she quickly squashed it. She couldn't let the prosecutor see her flinch. She couldn't let the court see her doubt. Her mind raced, the sharpness of her thoughts piercing through the chaos. This was a setup. The money wasn't planted just to implicate her. It was meant to make the case airtight. Someone had been smart enough to ensure her fingerprints were on it, but how had it happened? Alicia's mind snapped back to earlier that day, when she had been in the office with her team. She had never touched the money in question. She was sure of that. But then a chilling thought flashed in her mind. The delivery. That afternoon, a colleague from her firm had slipped something onto her desk, a stack of files with no explanation. She remembered the odd way he had glanced at her, the way he'd placed the files carefully before walking away. It had felt strange at the time, but she hadn't thought anything of it. Alicia's stomach churned as she realized the truth. Someone had used that opportunity to slip the money into the files, ensuring that it would be in her possession when the time came. They had set her up with precision, planting evidence that would be nearly impossible to explain away. The fingerprints were planted, and the evidence, no matter how false, was now against her. Alicia's breath quickened, but she knew she couldn't allow herself to be overwhelmed. She had to stay calm. She had to turn this around. She was not going to let someone get away with this. A sharp memory came to her, something that could change everything. She had overheard a conversation in the hallway the day before. Her life was turned upside down. One of her colleagues had mentioned a meeting and a cash transfer, but she hadn't thought anything of it at the time. She hadn't realized the significance of those words until now. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The setup wasn't just about the money. It was about making Alicia look guilty in the eyes of the jury. But she knew she couldn't let this lie stand. There was evidence she could use, people she could turn to, and she would find a way to prove the truth. Alicia straightened up in her seat, looking directly at the prosecutor with newfound confidence. "I don't know how my fingerprints ended up on that money," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "But I'll find out. And when I do, I'll prove that this entire case is a lie." The prosecutor's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. Alicia knew this was far from over. She had just begun her fight. Alicia took a deep breath, stood up, and faced the courtroom, her posture tall, despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. The eyes of the room were all on her, waiting for her response. For the first time since the trial began, Alicia felt a glimmer of control return. She had something they weren't expecting, something that would change. Whoever had set her up knew exactly how to manipulate the situation. They had orchestrated everything with precision, using her own success and reputation against her. As the prosecutor continued to build his case against her, Alicia realized that she wasn't just fighting for her innocence. She was fighting to expose the truth, to show the world that she had been wronged. Someone had tried to bury the truth, but Alicia was determined to make sure it saw the light of day, no matter the cost. Have you ever been framed or betrayed by someone you trusted? Let us know in the comments. The prosecutor stepped forward, relishing the moment. He had been building up to this, savoring every second of Alicia's downfall. The courtroom was tense, all eyes on him as he prepared to deliver his next crushing blow. Everything. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Before I respond to these allegations, I'd like to submit evidence that was sent to me anonymously this morning." The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Alicia reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, unassuming USB drive. She held it up for the judge to see, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. She knew the risks of what she was about to do. This evidence could either clear her name or bury her further, but she had no choice. This was her chance to show the court what had really happened. The judge gave a slight nod, signaling for the video to be played on the courtroom screen. The clerk quickly inserted the drive into the system, and within seconds, the screen flickered to life. The room fell into an eerie silence as everyone leaned forward, their attention fixed on the grainy footage now playing in front of them. The quality of the video wasn't perfect. The picture was slightly blurry, but it was clear enough to send chills down everyone's spine. Two men were visible, standing in a dimly lit room, their faces obscured by shadows. The voices were distorted, but the words were unmistakable. "We need to shut her up," a man's voice said, low and menacing. The tone was laced with anger, a deep hatred that Alicia could feel in the pit of her stomach. "Don't worry," another voice chuckled, its tone almost casual. "We'll plant the money and make sure her fingerprints are on it." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The courtroom was deathly silent as the realization slowly set in. Alicia had been framed. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or coincidence. It was a well-coordinated conspiracy to destroy her career, her reputation, and her life. The people who had orchestrated this attack on her were far more powerful than she had ever imagined. The moment the video ended, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps of disbelief filled the air as Alicia's attorney jumped to his feet. The prosecutor's smirk, which had been present since the beginning of the trial, vanished instantly. His face was now pale, his eyes darting nervously between Alicia and the judge. The judge's gavel slammed down hard, signaling for order. "Order in the court," he shouted, his voice stern, but there was no denying the shock that had spread throughout the room. The truth had come out, and there was no longer any doubt about Alicia's innocence. She had been set up, manipulated, and betrayed by powerful individuals trying to cover up their own wrongdoings. "This trial is a sham," Alicia's attorney shouted, his voice ringing with righteous anger. "My client is the victim of a corporate conspiracy." The prosecutor, who had once been so confident, now stood frozen. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that the case he had been so eager to win was now collapsing in front of him. Alicia's attorney continued to press the issue, demanding justice for the woman who had been wrongly accused. Alicia stood in the midst of the uproar, her heart racing, but a sense of relief washed over her. The truth was finally out. No longer would she be the one on trial. The real criminals were now exposed, their plot laid bare for everyone to see. Alicia had fought back, and with the power of this evidence, she had finally turned the tide in her favor. As the courtroom descended into chaos, Alicia stood tall, her resolve stronger than ever. The battle was far from over, but she had just won the most important fight. She had proven her innocence and revealed the truth behind the conspiracy to destroy her. What would you do if you were in Alicia's shoes? Have you ever been wrongfully accused? Let us know in the comments. The judge took a deep breath and turned to the prosecutor, his gaze cold and unwavering. The courtroom, still buzzing with shock from the evidence Alicia had just presented, grew quiet as everyone waited for the next move. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" the judge demanded, his voice firm, carrying the weight of authority. The prosecutor stammered, his face turning a deep shade of red as he fumbled with his papers. He had been so sure of his case, so certain that he had Alicia cornered. But now, with the video exposing the conspiracy and the true criminals unmasked, he was left speechless, unable to justify the lies he had peddled throughout the trial. His confident demeanor was shattered, and there was nothing left for him to do but stand there, visibly crumbling under the weight of his own failure. As the silence stretched on, the courtroom doors opened, and a group of law enforcement officers filed in. They weren't here for Alicia, they were here for the real criminals. The executives from Sterling and Moore Financial Group, who had orchestrated the entire setup to ruin Alicia, were being arrested right there in the courtroom. The shock on their faces was palpable, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. They had used their power to frame an innocent woman, and now they were going to pay the price for it. Alicia could hardly believe what she was seeing. The people who had tried to destroy her, who had betrayed her trust and tried to ruin her life, were now the ones being led away in handcuffs. It was justice at last, but it wasn't over yet. The judge, after a long pause, finally spoke again. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice softer now, but no less resolute, "you are declared innocent of all charges. The case is hereby thrown out." Alicia's heart skipped a beat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was official. She was free. She had been vindicated. She stood up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a breath of relief. The courtroom, still in stunned silence, seemed to hold its breath with her. But Alicia wasn't done yet. As the judge made his final ruling, the real consequences for those responsible for the setup began to unfold. The executives at Sterling and Moore were not just arrested. They were held accountable in a way that would leave a lasting mark. The firm was forced to pay Alicia millions in damages for the emotional and professional toll they had inflicted upon her. This wasn't just a victory for Alicia. It was a victory for every person who had ever been wrongfully accused or silenced. The corrupt officials involved in her setup were all exposed, their names forever linked to this scandal. The web of lies that had been carefully woven around Alicia had been unraveled, and those responsible could no longer hide behind their wealth and power. They were no longer untouchable. And as for Alicia, she walked out of that courtroom not just as a free woman, but as a national hero. Her name was now synonymous with integrity, courage, and resilience. She had stood up against a corrupt system and won. She had faced unimaginable odds, and through sheer determination, she had not only cleared her name, but had exposed the truth for the world to see. Alicia's victory wasn't just about her own freedom. It was about everyone who had ever been wronged by the powerful. She had proven that even the most corrupt systems could be challenged, that one person's voice could change the course of justice. And with that, Alicia Carter became more than just a financial analyst. She became a symbol of hope and change, showing the world that the truth always has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard people try to bury it. How would you feel if you were in Alicia's position? What would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation, as reporters swarmed around Alicia, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward her. The weight of the trial was still settling in, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alicia was able to breathe freely. The courtroom had erupted in victory, and now the world was waiting for her words. "Miss Carter, how does it feel to prove your innocence?" one reporter asked, pushing forward to capture her reaction. Alicia smiled, holding back tears of relief. The fight had been long, the struggle unimaginable, but now it was finally over. The truth had prevailed, and her name had been cleared. "The truth always wins," Alicia said, her voice steady, despite the emotions running through her. "No matter how hard they try to silence you, never stop fighting." The words felt more powerful now than they ever had before. They were no longer just a message to the press. They were a mantra, a declaration of everything Alicia had gone through. She had been falsely accused, wrongfully targeted, and betrayed by those she had trusted, but she had never given up, and now she was free. A few months later, Alicia's life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. She had launched her own investigative firm, one dedicated to helping whistleblowers like herself. With her firm, Alicia was able to provide support, legal counsel, and a voice for those who exposed the truth, even when doing so meant putting everything on the line. She knew firsthand how difficult it could be to stand up against powerful corporate interests, but now she had the resources to help others navigate the treacherous waters she had once been forced to swim through. Alicia's case also led to significant change within the legal system. New protections for corporate whistleblowers were put into place, making it harder for companies to silence those who exposed corruption. The landscape was shifting, and Alicia's story was the catalyst for a broader movement that would ensure others would not suffer the same fate she had. But the consequences for the corrupt officials who had tried to destroy her didn't stop there. The same prosecutor who had relentlessly pursued Alicia, using his position to further his own agenda, was disbarred. His role in the scheme to frame her came to light, and he was exposed for taking bribes himself. The irony of his fall from grace wasn't lost on anyone who had followed Alicia's case. The very man who had sought to destroy her career was now facing the same fate he had tried to impose on her. As Alicia moved forward, she carried with her a powerful message. Justice had prevailed, and the truth was unstoppable. She had emerged from the darkness of that courtroom as a symbol of hope and resilience. Her story wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about showing the world that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, standing up for what is right would always make a difference. What would you have done if you were in Alicia's position? Let us know in the comments. Like and share this story if you believe in fighting for justice.